Now that Vybz Kartel and his co-accused have been freed by the Court of Appeal, let's look back at 10 of the most significant moments in this case from it started in 2011 all the way back to the conclusion in 2024. So, what do you think are some of the big moments? Comment below now. Let me know. Let me know what you think of what I'm saying as well. And as always, we ask you to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and of course share the content so we can keep growing. Thank you so much for joining me courtside. I'm Dion Jackson Milo. Number 10 for me is where it all started. The reports of the murder. According to the prosecution, this took place on the 16th of August 2011. According to the prosecution allegations and what was said at trial, Kartel had given Lamar Chow as well as Clive Lizard Williams 2 illegal guns for safekeeping. When they couldn't account for them, he summoned them to this house in Havendale at 7 Swallowfield Avenue. Now, Chow says he ran out of the living room into another room. He says Kartel and Campbell brought him back into the living room where he saw Lizard lying motionless on the floor with St. John and Jones standing over him, and he said St. John had a building block in his hand. As I said, this then set off the entire sequence of events over the next 13 years. Number 9 for me is a sequence of events around that house in Havendale. Now, the police said they went to the house on the 22nd of August and there was a strong smell of disinfectant. They said they went back on the 27th of August and they said fire had destroyed the inside of the house. They went back on the 29th of August and they said there was a foul odor coming from the living room area. And then a month later, on September 30, said the rear of the house had been destroyed. So for me, this has to be on the list because this raises questions about possible interference with a police investigation. How did that influence or affect the investigation at all? And I think it also raises questions as to why such a key location, which was obviously important as part of the police investigation, why wasn't this better secured? Number 8, that's the arrest. Now, this happened on the 30th of September 2011. Kartel was said to have been at a hotel in New Kingston filming his reality show Teacher's Pet when the police arrested him. Initially, he was charged with possession of ganja. He was later charged with the 2 murders. And I think a lot of people probably have forgotten about the first murder charge, which was in relation to the death of a man called Barrington Bossy Burton. Whole heap of B's there. Somebody likes alliteration. And according to the allegations, Burton was killed in Gregory Park in St. Catherine on July 12, 2011. Now, Kartel was charged with that murder along with 2 other men, Lenberg MacDonald and Nigel Thompson. That trial started in July 2013. It didn't last long though because the prosecution ran into trouble. They were apparently unable to find some of the witnesses and they made an application to have witness statements entered into evidence. Witness statements can be introduced as evidence under certain circumstances. Defense counsel, defense lawyers are almost always going to object because really and truly you want to see somebody in the box, you want a witness in the box who will give evidence and you can then cross-examine them, test their evidence, try to shake their testimony and so on. But in this case, the judge did not give permission for the witness statements to be introduced. The Gleaner reported that he said he was not convinced that the prosecution had taken enough steps to locate the witnesses. At that point, prosecution case pretty much collapses. They didn't order any further evidence and the judge then directed the jury to return a verdict of not guilty. The other 2 men went free. Kartel stayed in custody because he still had to answer to this murder charge in relation to Clive Lizard Williams. And that takes us to number 7, when the trial started on November 18, 2013, a trial that was being watched all around the world by millions of people and by lots of media outlets. Number 6, now this was what happened on March 13, 2014. This was the last day of trial. The judge called the lawyers on the case into his chambers and told them that he had got information that one of the jurors had been trying to bribe the other jurors. And I did a whole video on this. It's called The Tale of the Tainted Juror. You can just check out the YouTube page and you can watch that and you can get all the information on that. But this makes it onto the list because the judge's decision to allow that juror who was trying to bribe the other jurors to remain on the case, to go into the jury room and deliberate with the other jurors, this really proved to be a turning point in the case. Later that same day, we come to the events that come in at number 5 because the jury found Kartel, Campbell, St. John and Jones all guilty. They found a 5th man who had been charged in the matter, Shane Williams, not guilty. Number 4. On the 3rd of April 2014, the judge sentenced all 4 men to life in prison. Now, Campbell and Jones were to serve 25 years at least before being eligible for parole. St. John was to serve 30 years before being eligible for parole, and Kartel was to serve 35 years before being eligible for parole. Moment number 3. The men appealed to the Court of Appeal, but on April 3rd, 2020, the Court of Appeal dismissed their appeals. This is what the court said. They said the technology exhibits were properly admitted into evidence. They said the judge properly handled the jury issue. They said despite the failure of the judge to follow a procedure involving sentences, the sentences were consistent with sentences handed down in previous cases, but the appellants were entitled to a deduction for the time spent in custody. Now, what this means is that the Court of Appeal didn't have any problem with the sentences, except they said the court needed to deduct the time the men had already been in custody since 2011. So just to explain for you very quickly, say you're sentenced to 10 years in jail, but you've already been in custody, been in prison in jail for 3 years before sentencing. What that means is that the judge has to subtract that 3 from the 10 so that you only serve another 7. So you serve 10 in all instead of 13. And that's what the Court of Appeal said here. So this would have been a blow to the men, but they still had a last resort. This brings us to point number 2, moment number 2, because on March 14, 2024, the Privy Council quashed the convictions of the men, meaning threw out the convictions, and sent the matter back to the Jamaican Court of Appeal for the Jamaican Court of Appeal to decide if there should be a retrial. And the Privy Council's decision was based on that issue of jury misconduct and the trial judge's decision to allow the juror who was trying to bribe the other jurors to continue to sit on the case. Now, this decision was a huge deal for Kartel and his co-accused. It meant they were back in the game. The game wasn't over, but at this point now, they know they have another shot. Depending on what the Court of Appeal decides, it could be an acquittal outright, or at the worst, they would at least get another trial. And of course, moment number 1 is the Court of Appeal's decision on that retrial issue. The court held a hearing as to whether the men should be retried. That started on June 10, 2024. It lasted for 6 days. Now, I covered the hearing, so you can watch my videos in which I recap the various days of the hearing. But it was clear that the judges were concerned about the time the men had been in custody since 2011, about the length of time it may take for a retrial to be held. So on July 31, 2024, the Court of Appeal announced their much anticipated decision, which is that the men should not be retried for murder, that verdicts of acquittal should be entered, and that they should be freed. And I did a video on lessons to be learned from the case, so you can watch that as well. Have a very special video that I'm working on. I hope to be able to tell you more about that in coming weeks. For now, have to leave it there. Thank you so much for being with me courtside. I'm Dion Jackson Miller. See you next time.